Self-inquiry is the approach that has become popular or was put in place to a large extent due to Ramana Maharshi. And Ramana Maharshi's teachings, which in a very succinct way talks about who am I, and that is a path and practice that he gave to all the sadhakas. So, self inquiry, when we say the word self inquiry, it is very clearly trying to bring us to the realization that there is a more superior and a more purer self than the ego self. So, the word self, when we talk from this context, that which S, which starts with that lowercase or the S in that first letter S, which if it is a lowercase s, then that self is not the pure self, the highest self. It is the egoic self. And that self, which we talk about from the scriptures, the Indian scriptures, which is the highest realization of all sadhana, is usually with capital S, the S in the SELF. So that self which we want to realize, or sometimes called a self-realization, that self-realization needs us to understand and transcend that ego. So the process of our spiritual journey from this context or this kind of sadhana requires us to know that there is an ego self. And this ego self is what I'm identified with. So identification of ego self happens through many ways. One is a very pure physical identification, that I am this body and no more. So this is the ego identifies with the body. Then the next level of identification can also happen at the different society level. I'm the son of so and so, or I have such and such a job, or I have such and such a husband, wife. See, all this in relation to another entity, another person. We assume I am this based on another person. So that also is an egoic self. And here comes a lot of different stages of our emotions which connect to that ego and make that ego big or small. Like if I am a very successful person, then that ego becomes very proud. It is a very proud ego. If I'm an unsuccessful person, then that ego has it has low self-esteem, as they say, meaning there is also an ego there. There is an ego identification, but this ego identification thinks that I am lesser than others, and that also is a problem because that is not the true nature of who we are. So similarly, at the worldly level, like we are not able to even function sometimes if we identify very closely with a certain society, family, and other things. Like if somebody he is a very good uh, musician or a poet or somebody, or if he and is born to a family which has pure, which is a history of being in business or being doctors, then there is a lot of pressure that identification drives that person to go according to the society. See, all this is again where ego identification causes the problem. And the biggest challenge of egoic identification and not knowing our true nature comes in relationships. Every relationship, people, not just husband, wife, or partners. Every relationship, that element of ego, when that is dominant, it inhibits our ability to have unconditional love. It doesn't allow us to have a common understanding with people and work from that level of pure well-being for that relationship. So this is the challenge of ego, and we don't realize that ego is what keeps us from realizing that pure happiness, that pure joy. So this path of self-inquiry first it wants us to recognize that we are identified with the ego most of the time. And then there is the pointing. What is the pointing is that there is a higher identification we have, purer identification, and that it is worthwhile to seek that identification. Because unless we come to that pure identification of who we are, we will not have a proper happiness. Our life will always be up and down. And most importantly, we will not come to realize what is called as purnatva, meaning completeness. We will always feel insecure, we'll always feel incomplete, because that is the nature of ego. The ego tends to divide us, the ego tends to make me separate from others. And as long as that separation is there, we will not know that unity, that one universal nature of consciousness, or that true, like it is like, when a wave, as long there is the wave is identified as the wave, it will not know its source in the ocean. It will always think I am the wave. And so then there is competition. Am I bigger than this wave? Am I smaller than that wave? I'm just humanizing the wave. Probably doesn't think like that, but I'm putting that human emotions to that. Okay, so this is the path of self-inquiry, and the best and the most profound example of this was Ramana Maharshi, because he took just this one path as being adequate. And from there, actually, from the teachings of Ramana Maharshi now, both in East and in West, there are so many teachers who have some kind of connection or root to that teaching, or that format of his teaching. Of course, even like Buddhism and yoga and all that are also trying to free us from the ego. But the most important thing is that in the path of self-inquiry, if we have some understanding of Vedanta, yoga, and other things, it is easier. Otherwise, we have to go on our own, and we may or may not be able to understand the different subtle nuances of the workings of ego. So when we really understand the path of yoga and Vedanta, then we will understand there are so many layers to that ego that needs to be unraveled. So two approaches. One is we discover all of that, go step by step, find out all of that. Or the other approach is we directly try to abide in that pure nature of consciousness. But again, like sometimes what happens is, for many people, this, when we talk about Atman consciousness and all that, they becomes a very theoretical, intellectual understanding. So they are not able to see through that layers of ego, and yet that ego takes a very subtle intellect layer of identification, mental and intellect layer of identification, and thinks that it is okay, it is already free because it is studying the Shastras, it is got this. So there is where, we have to really we can really benefit if we are on a constant self-introspection on a daily basis. So the journey of a spiritual sadhaka is that he or she has to go through introspection to really see where they are, and if the subtle nuances of ego is in the underplay.